So today I'm going to be talking about powerfully accepting truthful harmony. Powerfully accepting truthful harmony. And this is building on the global vision. Hashtag the global vision. Kinship with all life. How can I see connectedness? How can I see oneness? How can I see love with my physical vision, with my eyes? I mean, when I connect to what that question's saying and I look about the world, well, I've got people and bodies. I mean, we're sitting here, we're in separate bodies. So physically, we don't look like we're one. I look into gender, into age, to ethnicity. And so there's nothing, when I physically look at people, that suggests to me that there's oneness. When I look at the environment, when I look at things, when I look at buildings, when I look at cars, planes, trains, there's nothing in those objects that suggests to me there's oneness, there's connectedness, right? There's nothing obvious that's saying there's oneness. When I think about technology, when I think about computers, when I think about the ability to phone or Skype with someone across the world, there's nothing that suggests oneness. When I get onto Facebook, when I'm looking at tweets, if I'm on Snapchat, Instagram, Pinterest, or wherever it is I may be communicating, or when I'm reading the news, when I'm reading a newspaper, when I'm seeing the news, there's nothing that suggests oneness, connectedness. And yet I know there's one truth about everything I see. Can you guess what it is? It's changing. Everything that I see is changing. And one of the things I've come to realize is that there is an illusion of reality. What I've come to realize is that everything I'm seeing is being co-created. Every experience I've ever had is been a result of my beliefs in separation. It's been a result of my forgetting the truth of who I am, of myself. That's the illusion. So how can I understand the world that I see if it's always changing? How can I understand people? They're always changing. The environment is always changing. How can I understand? Even for that matter, when I think about my thoughts, about my understanding, even the idea of mine and my, that doesn't speak to connectedness, does it? Speaks to separation. Doesn't speak to oneness. I have my thoughts. My thoughts are different from your thoughts. Unless you're a telepath, you do not know what my thoughts are. For that matter, unless you're an empath, you don't know what my emotions are. And even then, you're still not having my experience. So there's a lot that is suggesting to me that there's not oneness. And then I get into this beautiful ego trap. And it is beautiful in a very perverse way, because now I have my thoughts and I have my opinions, right? And I want to justify them. And when my thoughts are different from your thoughts, then we have a difference of opinion. And the more attached we become to those thoughts, to those opinions, the stronger the differences become. And then that leads me down this pathway to enemies. More separation. Or I can hold on to the past. I can condemn. I can feel a deeper sense of separation because over time we've had a difference of opinion. And that has pulled us further and further apart. Now, in the reading earlier on, what was talked about is that one of the great challenges is if you're going to pray for happiness, but you're feeling miserable, that's really hard prayer work, right? If you are going to pray for a feeling of oneness and connectedness, but you're looking with your physical vision, and all you're seeing is separateness, that's a really hard prayer, right? Are you seeing, or am I seeing war? Am I seeing terror? Am I seeing death? Am I seeing disaster? Is all this stuff that's happening God? Do I have loving thoughts or do I have fear thoughts? Do I have loving thoughts or do I have separation thoughts? Do I have loving thoughts or do I have attack thoughts? What kind of thoughts have I got going on? So let's go to the next slide. Because what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk a little bit about this. I'm going to delve into what's going on. And for those of you who've been following along, this is the LEAF series, Loving Kindness, Equality, Acceptance, Forgiveness. Now, for a while, I've been talking about forgiveness, and we had our Discovery Retreat on April 20th, where we delved deeply into forgiveness. And then last week, I talked about equality. So this week, I'm going to talk about acceptance. I'm not going to follow the letters in order. Just trust me. It's going to work out. So I'm going to share with you a concept today that may help you to get your head around why it feels such a challenge. So I'm going to assume you've heard of a branch of science called psychology. And what I've come to realize is that psychology is a study of the ego mind. I'm going to talk more about that a little later on. But let's go to the next slide. Because I want to share with you something that's called the Theory of Cognitive Dissonance. So it's a little bit of instruction, so do bear with me. But the goal is I'll give lots of examples to help you get your head around what do I mean by cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance results in any situation involving conflicting attitudes, beliefs, behaviors. So if you have two different ideas going on in your mind, you're going to feel some discomfort. So for example, if I'm praying for happiness but I don't feel happy, I feel dissonance. Okay? Let's have a look at, just to finish this slide. So what happens is, when I have this conflict, this internal conflict between an attitude, belief, or behavior, this is going to create feelings of discomfort. And the discomfort within us drives change in attitudes, beliefs, behaviors to remove the discomfort and restore balance, right? To feel better. Now, what I love about the theory of cognitive dissonance is it explains so much that's going on. It explains why people wake up, why they feel there's got to be something better than this. It explains why we begin the journey of spiritual awakening. In fact, cognitive dissonance is one of the engines for that awakening. It explains why we're changing. Let's have a look at how Dilbert, let's go to the next slide. So what Dilbert has to say on cognitive dissonance. So, why should I hire you as my consultant? I'll use my special process of cognitive dissonance to improve employee morale. How does it work? When people are in an absurd situation, their minds rationalize it by inventing a comfortable illusion. Okay, go with it. So the consultant goes to an employee. Isn't it strange that you have this dead-end job when you're twice as smart as your boss? The hours are long, the pay is mediocre, nobody respects your contributions, and yet you freely choose to work here. And then the employee, it's absurd. No, wait, there must be a reason. I must work here because I love the work. And then he's thinking to himself, I love this job, I love this job. And the consultant's going, next. That's cognitive dissonance. And it's going on all the time. Cognitive dissonance was actually observed and coined as a theory by a psychologist called Leon Festinger. And what Leon worked out was he was doing what's called a participant observed study. So they're observing people. And what he was observing was a cult. He was observing a religious cult that had a belief that the world would be destroyed in a flood. And he was very curious about what would happen to the cult when the flood didn't happen. Big surprise, the flood didn't happen because, again, the cult was focused on effects. It was focused on teaching through worldly environmental ideas and cues of separation, completely missing the point. But what happened was the fringe believers, those who were kind of getting into it, those who really weren't attached to it, they put it down to a learning experience. They realized they'd made a fool out of themselves. They saw it as an opportunity to become wise. But here's the interesting thing. The committed believers, those who were really into it, they reinterpreted the experience. They reinterpreted it so that in their minds they could convince themselves they'd been right all along. This goes on all the time. Just like that employee, if we really have a deep attachment to something and we really feel dissonance, then we will reinterpret. So let's go to the next slide. How does change take place? It's three ways in which change, it's three approaches we're going to take. We're going to reject, we're going to justify, we're going to reject, or we're going to change. Okay? So, the tendency we've got, the reason why this change around our attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors takes place is because we are seeking consistency. We're seeking resonance. We don't want to feel uncomfortable. We're looking to feel comfortable, right? So, something's got to change to eliminate this cognitive dissonance. I don't like to feel continuously uncomfortable. I don't like to feel discomfort. I'm going to assume that you don't either. So, justify is about acquiring new information that outweighs the dissonant attitude, belief, or behavior. So, for example, you may be a smoker, and you may have been told that smoking is bad for your health. But then a study comes along and says, oh, it's not definitive. There's not definitive evidence. And that would be an example then of you using that not definitive information to justify continuing smoking. Or you may feel, you know what, I don't care about all that. I just really enjoy it. And I enjoy it more in the short term than any long-term concern. So you're justifying it. This goes on a lot. Think about it. Or we may reject. We may reduce the importance of the attitude, the belief, the behavior. We may feel that, well, it's better to live for today. I would rather have the short-term sensory thrill of the nicotine coursing through my body to continue the smoking than live a long, boring, sensory-deprived life. Okay? So we'll just, even though we know that smoking is bad for our health, we will reject that dissonance. And then, of course, there's change. And that's really about our changing the attitude, the belief, the behavior. And what this is about is this is making the relationship between what's going on inside of us resonant. This is about taking the two ideas and making them resonant. So one of the things that we might do then is stop smoking. We would no longer have dissonance between smoking and the idea that it's bad for our health. We would have removed the dissonance by changing the behavior. You following me? So, justifying is about keeping the attitude, the belief, the behavior with new information. And a good example of this is science and spirituality. I hear a lot of science justifying science to deny spirituality, because there'll be yet one more new study that comes up that even though there may only be one or two studies versus hundreds of thousands, this happens with climate warming. There's probably 2 to 3% of scientists who do not reject the idea of global warming. And the deniers justify their beliefs that there's not global warming because there's 2 to 3% of scientists that are willing to go out there. Now, forgetting the fact that the scientific model itself is inherently flawed, forgetting the fact that, well, who funded those particular 2 to 3% of scientists that are disregarding it, a lot of people are justifying. So climate change, science and spirituality, spiritual bypass. We may find ourselves, well, we'll justify the way we are approaching our spiritual practice because we're getting new information. Then there's reject, denial. This is where we reduce the importance. This can be, for example, in the spiritual journey where we start to believe that this teaching is all about positive thinking. No, this teaching is not all about positive thinking. Yes, it's important to think positively, and that's a big part of it. But if you think waking up to your spiritual magnificence is going to come about because all you do is think positively, what you'll do is you'll reject the discomfort, the emotions, the upset that's surfacing to tell you something, to inform you something about yourself that you need to know. And if you just bypass that, you're not actually going to learn what it is you need to know. Or you can change your behavior, and that's acceptance. So you following me? Cognitive dissonance. And if you think about it, it's going on for all of you. In fact, you may even, during what I've talked about, have felt some form of discomfort, because even the idea of being made aware of cognitive dissonance and having that explain your sense of discomfort could be triggering discomfort. You get the paradox? You get the irony of that? Let's go to the next slide. So, let's have a look at what's going on. So I've talked in the past about there are two aspects of the mind. There's the ego mind and there's the spiritual mind. So, first of all, the first thing to bear in mind is you've got a constant cognitive dissonance between your ego mind and your spiritual mind. Constant. Until you learn how to stop focusing on the physical world. This is why I asked you at the beginning, how can I see oneness and connectedness with my physical vision, with my eyesight? I can't. And that always presents a sense of cognitive dissonance. That's why I've explained that theory to you, to help you connect and understand. Psychologists are really good at studying and explaining the ego mind. So, what's going on then is the ego mind is all about body programming and survival. It is all about how we're interacting with the physical world. The ego mind has its value. It's not to be denied. It helps us translate in this world. It helps us to make decisions that don't put our physical, fragile, somewhat fragile body into harm's way. There are good things going on through this. The spiritual mind is eternal. The spiritual mind is that part of us that is God. The ego mind is fleeting. The ego mind exists for the purpose of this incarnation. And what's going on is the ego mind does not know how to accept the spiritual mind. And the spiritual mind knows the ego mind isn't real. Because from the perspective of God, the ego mind is fleeting. It's only here to see us through a lifetime. And then it's gone. And as we're here, we've got this pain body. Now, the pain body is like the memory, emotional memory bank of the ego mind. It's where we put all of those unresolved accumulation of painful experiences. Those moments where we felt discomfort through cognitive dissonance, or we felt some emotion because our emotional guidance system was telling us we weren't knowing God. We were turned away from God. We felt bad. We didn't address those emotions. We didn't come to know that that was God in front of us that was causing us hurt. We didn't forgive ourselves for forgetting their God. We didn't come to that place of remembrance, because that's what forgiveness is. So we suppressed it, we tucked it down, and then that grew as our pain body. So think about the cognitive dissonance that's going on all the time. It's constant. And the journey of spiritual awakening is when you learn to stop looking at the world for your source of happiness. When you start looking within, the cognitive dissonance starts to go away. One of the things that I've found is I spend a lot more time in bliss and happiness in my life because I don't look at the world in the way that I used to. I don't look at the world to make me happy. I find that when I listen, when I meditate, that I have access to higher realms of thought. I feel more love. I get inspired. I had a beautiful moment yesterday morning, actually Friday night. I was trying to prepare for this, to deliver this talk. And I was sitting there, it was about half an hour. And I realized it wasn't coming. I wasn't feeling it. It didn't matter what I was trying to do and all my usual approaches. So I set it down. And then Saturday morning, I was realizing, well, I'm going to have to do a talk in 24 hours. Okay, so I'll meditate. And then as I meditated, I literally needed to pull the pen and the paper out, the pencil and paper out, because I couldn't stop writing. Because I listened. The dissonance went away. On the Friday night, I was caught up in the dissonance of, I've got this time-based goal of preparing for a talk by Sunday morning. But I was not feeling it. And my mind, my ego mind, The lower realms of thought, fear, focused on fear, were getting me caught up in the idea, well, you're not getting the talk done. But I set that down. I stopped looking at the talk as an event to be accomplished. And I started listening. And what practice has shown me is that when I stop looking with my physical vision and I start looking with my spiritual vision, when I stop looking through my eyes and I start feeling and listening, the dissonance goes away. And what I've realized is I'm actually in a natural state of bliss all the time. And I have been my whole life. But those times where I didn't feel bliss, I was busy looking at the world. I was busy trying to manipulate the world, to control the world. So here's some questions for you. Now, if it's your first time, you're new, don't feel overwhelmed by these questions. If you've got a journal, by all means, you can get it out and you can write them. And I'm going to post these to Facebook later on. Here are some questions for you to explore your cognitive dissonance. What meaning does that which does not last truly have for me? What meaning does that which does not last truly have for me? Now, if you think about that question, what meaning does that which is changing have for me? Another question, how is judging what I see serving me? How is having a thought, how is coming to an opinion about something or someone serving me? How are your opinions about me serving you? Really? How are they serving you? Given that the ego mind is the judge, the ego mind is the critic, the ego mind is the analyst, the spiritual mind is none of these things, by the way. Because the spiritual mind is God, right? If you can accept that, that means God's never condemned. So therefore, God is not a judge. God simply knows. So there's no reasoning, there's no analysis that needs to take place. And for God, there is perfection. So there is no critique. Your opinions, your thoughts are not God. And when you are immersed in them, you generally find yourself not feeling very good. Maybe even discomfort. Oh, cognitive dissonance. It's going on. Another way, I believe the theory of cognitive dissonance really is psychology's effort to explain a part of the emotional guidance system when we're pointed away from God. Now, a psychologist wouldn't get that, but that's okay. That's not their job. Psychologist is looking here. I'm looking at it all. I'm focused up there, but I do want to understand the ego mind. So given that the ego mind is a judge, how can I truly understand what I judge? How can I truly understand what I judge? I mean, I've got something here that is fleeting, that for the purpose of my survival, that is not God, that actually is a product of my belief in separation, because I'm alive. How can I trust it? Truly. How can I truly understand what the ego mind is judging? Put those in your pipe and smoke them. Let's go to the next slide. So, powerfully accepting truthful harmony. It's actually an acronym for PATH. Powerfully accepting truthful harmony. So, this is something that you can do. When I talk about powerfully, the basic idea here is that it's about knowing God. It's about knowing that God is the source of demonstration of power, of miracles. The reason why demonstration happens, the reason why if you are engaged in the process of spiritual mind treatment is because you are God. That's your power. As you start to connect, and the reason why I'm teaching about the idea of the ego mind and the spiritual mind is to point out to you that the ego mind is a prison. And that when you start to understand the spiritual and the ego mind as aspects of your mind, then the prison door is opened. That's why you're here. And you start to realize nothing is holding me in this prison but me. I made the prison. My emotional mind is the prison. And if I live within that emotional mind, I suffer. Now, you may have heard the story of Plato's cave, a 2,500-year-old story, metaphor, an allegory, that is telling us And how Plato's cave goes is like this. We're in a cave, we're chained, and we are looking at shadows on the wall. What we don't know is that the light from the entrance of the cave is shining behind us, and the shadows we're seeing is the silhouettes of our bodies sat in the cave. But we believe we're chained. And what happens is we wake up, we undo the chains, maybe someone comes and helps us, and then we walk into the sunlight. And then when we get into the sunlight, we suddenly realize and we feel compassion for those that are still in the cave. And we come back in and we try and tell them. This was Plato's, and through his teacher, Socrates' explanation for what was going on 2,500 years ago. And we still don't get it, because the illusions, the shadows on the wall of the cave, they are false ideas about the self. Maybe one of those false ideas is that I am the ego mind and there is no spiritual mind. Maybe one of those false ideas is that I will find oneness by looking into the world. Maybe one of those false ideas is that, well, even though I feel discomfort, even though I'm feeling cognitive dissonance, I'm going to use this new piece of information which justifies me not needing to change so I can feel a little better about it. False ideas about the self. But when you connect to the idea of powerfully, what this is saying is that I am unlimited in my power to save myself from my illusions. And remembering that the idea of saving yourself is just that. It's about realizing and waking up to the fact that the false ideas you had about the self, the time you spent dwelling on your thoughts, it's illusions. None of it's God. And then we remember that love never forgot me. And then there's accepting. This is when we accept, well, maybe I've been mistaken. Maybe I was in that cult that believed that the flood was going to destroy the earth. And, well, you know what? I was mistaken. I made a mistake. That's okay. I am as God created me. And I've had false thoughts. Let's go to the next slide. I've had false thoughts. Ernest Holmes said, all life is one life. Just as every physical substance known derives from one universal energy, so there is but one life principle, which is God, in which we all live and from which infinite source our individual lives are drawn. Let's go back to the next slide. So, go to the next slide, that's it. So in acceptance, this is about seeing the world as a place to find freedom. But to be able to do that, we have to look for loving kindness. We have to look for knowing that all are equal. We have to look for that sense of acceptance, not judgment. And when we are observing those who are forgetting that they're God, we forgive. We find our power. We accept our holiness. And in accepting the fact that we are holy because we are God, and then in looking for it in the world, we see it. And then the world is holy. Everything is holiness. Everything is God. There's no room for fear because I accept God's guidance. I listen. And then there's truthful. So the idea now that I am blessed as a child of God because God intends good. And how can I be disturbed when God abides within me in peace? How is it possible? And then when we're really being truthful with ourselves, we'll recognize that I have no thoughts apart from God because I am God and all my thoughts are known to God. And if I stop dwelling on my thoughts and start looking for God, the cognitive dissonance goes away. If I stop focusing on the physical world, if I stop observing and immerse myself there. And finally, harmony. Knowing worthiness is how we know God. Knowing that I am worthy, knowing that everyone is worthy. I realize that the world reflects what I look for. That's how I get to be in harmony. If I am looking for love, and that part of me that is God is love, I'm in harmony. If I'm not looking for love, if I buy into the small talk, talking about the bad things, that's not harmony. If I buy into the small talk, talking about trivial worldly stuff, that's not harmony. But when I am looking for love, when I'm looking for oneness, when I'm looking for connectedness, When I know it's there, I see we're all connected. Let's go to the next slide. So Ernest Holmes said, all nature shows a divine relatedness. I have but to contemplate the blade of grass, the blowing leaf, or the solar system to see that he who has created me has shaped and arranged all things to prosper and exist in harmony. So here's the thing. If I look for kinship with all life, if I look for harmony, if I look to understand that that which created me has shaped and arranged all things to prosper and exist in harmony, if I but look at nature and understand how effortlessly nature is thriving in spite of what humans would do to the ecology, to the environment, in spite of how we keep building houses to encroach upon the habitat of animals, nature is in harmony, harmonizing and working with its environment, just knowing itself. There's no greater example than that. So let's go to the final slide. So, powerfully accepting truthful harmony. This is how we walk the path. Powerfully accepting truthful harmony. So let's go to the final slide and do the truth mantra. So I invite you to join with me in just closing this out. And as you connect with this, really feel that sense of love is all, knowing that love is all. That the idea of love is all is saying that I am looking for love. I am saying all is love. And then to begin to say truth begun, because now I'm recognizing I have begun to truly understand what love and life is through me. And then to recognize I am love because I'm claiming that. And as I get better and clearer and more practiced at knowing I am love, I recognize it in everyone. We are one. So let's finish this out. Love is all. Truth begun. I am love. And we are one. I love and I bless you. Thank you very much.